Hello, this is Tony Crawford from Alpha PM. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can easily and quickly develop a project management methodology and training program from scratch if needed by implementing a virtual PMO. And once implemented, I will show you how you can use this PMO to deliver major improvements in the performance of all your projects. So is this webinar for you? Do you need a project management methodology? Do you need project management training? Would you like to improve the performance and success of your projects without the cost and overhead of a full-time PMO? If the answer to any of these questions is yes, but especially if the answer to all of the questions is yes, then you could definitely benefit from implementing a virtual PMO. So the objectives of this webinar are in 5 steps. In the first step, I will show you what I mean by a virtual project management office and how you can easily build one within your organization. A project lifecycle is a critical ingredient of any project management methodology. So in step 2, I will talk about project lifecycles and show you how to build one for your organization if you do not already have one. Steps 3 and 4 best go together so that you develop your project management methodology and training for each of the phases and processes in your project lifecycle. And in the final step 5, I will show you how you can apply all the resources and components in your PMO once implemented to measure and improve the performance of all your projects. So let's start with step 1. What is a virtual PMO and how can you build one within your organization? PMI in their latest PMBOK guide have defined what a PMO is. It's an organizational structure that standardizes the project-related governance processes and facilitates the sharing of resources, methodologies, tools, and techniques. And in a previous edition, they also provided a few additional bullets describing what the functions of a PMO are. Again, very similar to what's summed up in the yellow box. One thing I think they've missed and not emphasized at all is the role of being responsible for portfolio management. I think that's a very important role for a PMO, particularly if your organization has the type of projects where you're doing a lot of internal work. It's not driven by contracts and outside work, but it's driven by internal projects, and there's always conflict within an organization of which one should take priority, which one should get the resources, and this is where I think a PMO can play a particularly valuable role. There is also a wide spectrum of PMO types. I've kind of summed it up into these 3 main areas, but there are lots of variations in between. But let's start with the supportive type of PMO. These are the PMOs that are mostly passive, if I can use that word. They sit on the sidelines and they do provide training, they do provide methodologies and tools and templates, but then they mostly just collect status reports if there's any problems, and they forward that on to senior management, who then deal directly with the projects to help them out. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got the directive type of PMOs, and these are the ones that are directly responsible for the projects and the project managers. And then in the middle you've got the facilitative type of PMO, which is somewhere in between. They both provide all the tools and training and templates, but also when it comes to problems and issues, they don't just sit on the sidelines. They're in partnership with the project managers to try and help them. And if a project's successful or if it fails, it should be seen as a joint responsibility of both the project manager and the PMO. So a facilitative type of PMO is definitely the type of PMO that I recommend you implement. So what's the difference between a real or traditional PMO and a virtual PMO? Well, in the traditional PMO, you staff it on a full-time basis. So everyone in the PMO is there for whatever period of time they're there for, but they are all full-time while they are there. So the main pros of that is that the resources are dedicated to the PMO, so there is no conflict with other work. But I think the major con with that type of approach is that it is difficult to attract and get the best project managers into the PMO. And that's for two reasons. That's number one, because the project managers themselves don't want to go to the PMO. They see this as an administrative backwater, perhaps. And number two, the executive management themselves don't want to put their best resources in the PMO. They've got these major, very critical business projects that they're struggling to maybe keep afloat, and obviously the best project managers are going to be assigned to those because that's where the biggest need is seen to be. And when you have a separate PMO, there's definitely the potential for an us versus them mentality. There are those who are project managers on the front lines doing all the work, and then there are the people in the PMO that are seen to be sitting there creating bureaucracy, creating unnecessary procedures, and not really helping project managers to be successful. And once you have a sort of traditional PMO with people on a full-time basis, it tends to grow, and the overhead of having that PMO is difficult to justify because quite often there are no real measures that tell you if the PMO is being at all successful or not, and all you tend to get are the negativity, if you like, from the project managers complaining about all the procedures that the PMO is introducing. So it becomes difficult to justify the existence of the PMO, which is very often seen as being very bureaucratic. So how about a virtual PMO? Well, the main thing that I'm advocating here is that you have a virtual PMO and you staff it on a part-time basis of 1 to 2 days a week, and it would be typically maybe 5 to 7 people. So you've got these 5 to 7 people who do have their normal business and their normal projects, but they're also committed to spend some time building up this virtual PMO. So the pros of this approach, as you can imagine, is that you can attract and get the best project managers. Once a project manager sees that this is not a full-time career that they're embarking on, that they have the opportunity to influence how projects are developed, and they have the opportunity to share their knowledge and experience with others in the organization, then you do tend to get the best project managers. And you can implement it within existing budgets because you're not really adding any staff to the organization. You're trying to make do with the resources you already have. So those are the pros, but you can guess what the con is. The con is that other project work can take priority and reduce the productivity and effectiveness of the PMO. And this is a real danger because obviously if people have major projects and if they're among the best of the project managers, they're going to have a lot of work thrown at them, so it is going to be a problem. But putting the two together, you can see that there are pros and cons with each of them. And I've been an executive, I've been a CIO in a large organization, so my experience and my judgment tells me that even with the cons, I think a virtual PMO is a good way to go, particularly for small organizations. If you're a large organization, then I think you can justify, or you should be able to justify a full-time PMO, or you should be able to at least justify assigning people so that they are committed for developing the PMO. If you don't want the full-time PMO, you can have a little bit more control perhaps over the resources that you allocate. But in a smaller organization particularly, I think your only choice is the virtual PMO. So here's the recommended PMO structure, and this is perhaps one of the most important slides in the whole presentation because it's going to show you all the components that you need to build with your PMO, and they'll all play a very important part in making sure that your PMO is successful. So let's start with the PMO director. You definitely need to assign someone who will act in this PMO director role, and it should be one of your most senior and most experienced project managers. And again, here we're talking about at this point a virtual PMO. So throughout the rest of this presentation, you can assume I'm talking about a virtual PMO. These are staffed with maybe 5 to 7 people, as I say, from your project managers who are the most experienced and the most successful, and they've committed to giving 1 to 2 days per week for the duration of their stay within this virtual PMO. So we have assigned, let's say, the PMO director, and one of the first roles we'll talk about then is the portfolio management role. This is the one that I said was not really covered by PMI, but I do think it's an important role within the PMO. And the role of this portfolio management is to ensure the PMO is to help ensure the selection of projects and make sure they're aligned with business priorities and capabilities. The second role is to provide project management methodology and training. And here we want to provide an effective and consistent set of project management methodologies, tools and templates, and related support and training. The third of the components of the PMO is project performance reporting. And here we want to provide standard reporting tools such as a project dashboard that all projects implement and use the same dashboard. And we want to consolidate the reporting of project performance and support the resolution of key issues and risks. So the PMO is not just going to be reporting on projects, but where there are issues, they're going to play a major role in helping to resolve those issues and risks. The fourth of the roles of the PMO is project initiation and support. So with this role, we want to ensure the successful initiation of projects through mentoring and coaching, project resourcing, project scoping, initial health check, and issues resolution. So that might sound like a tall order for people who are part-time, but I know it can be done, and I know it has been done. So I really want you to at least keep open the mindset that said, yes, this is a very useful role, and this is a role that you can actually follow. And again, at the end, I'll show you how you can contact me. I'm always available to help you and guide you in any way that you would like. And this is not just in project initiation, but if help is needed, if projects run into difficulty during the rest of the phases of the project, then the PMO should be there to extend their support in any way they can. And then there's project resourcing, the fifth of the components of the PMO. And in this, as you can all guess, resourcing of projects is a very challenging issue, particularly in most organizations that apply the matrix type of organization structure, where you share some of the key resources amongst many projects. So there's got to be some vehicle, some mechanism for making sure that the resources that a project needs are made available with the needed skills and in a timely manner. So again, the PMO, I think, can act as a good cohesive and coordinating force for helping this to happen. And then finally, the sixth of the roles of the PMO that I'm advocating are something that I don't think many PMOs in fact do today, but this is to have some kind of a project health check or project audit process. And I'll explain in more detail later on what that's all about. But basically, it's a kind of a checklist that projects go through in the different phases of the project to make sure they're doing all the right things. And it can be very simple, but it can also be very powerful. So we want to support the projects. The PMO should be able to support projects in the completion of their health checks. And if a project runs into difficulty, let's say it's red flagged, it's running over budget, or it's running behind schedule, then the project health check, instead of just being done by the project manager, could be done with the participation of the PMO as a formal project audit to determine what are the issues and what needs to be done to get the project back on track. So as I say, this is an important slide. We'll come back to it periodically, but I recommend you sort of keep this picture in mind, because I think that all these pieces, there's 6 components, and there's the governance role, which I should cover now perhaps. So the top level is the governance, the PMO governance. So as well as the director, you should establish a PMO executive council, and we'll talk about the makeup of that council. And then at some point you may also want to introduce a project manager advisory council, and all of these act as your governance, your PMO governance layer, which is to facilitate the selection and success of all projects under the jurisdiction of the PMO. So with those components, as I say, keep those in mind, and we will come back to this slide from time to time. So a virtual PMO team can have two roles. I guess one is when it's under development. You haven't, say, got your methodology and training, so you want to develop those. So let's talk about the development phase first. So in this phase, you're going to establish your virtual PMO. You're going to develop a project life cycle again if you haven't got one. You're going to develop project management methodology, tools and templates, and develop a project management training to go along with that. And again, if you don't have a good dashboard, you'll want to develop a project dashboard. You'll want to establish some good HR processes to make sure your resourcing needs are met on all your projects. And finally, you'll want to establish some project portfolio management processes. So as I've said a couple of times, I think already, I would see this as typically being 5 to 7 people. These are 5 to 7 senior experienced project managers within your PMO, and they would be spending typically about 2 days per week on average for each person. Maybe the HR person spends less, and maybe some of the people might spend more. It'll depend on the particular role they've assigned to and the particular experiences they might have. So that's a development phase of the PMO. Now once you've implemented it, once you've cut over, you've got your training, you've got your methodology, now you're going to have an ongoing role. I advocate keeping the virtual PMO. It might change the structure. You might have different people come in and out. You might want to keep the PMO director at least for a period of time as you transition resources in and out, or you might keep the same resources. But the roles will change a little bit. So in an ongoing basis, you're now going to be managing the project portfolio. You're going to be monitoring the performance of all your projects and making sure you take whatever steps are needed to improve it. You're going to maintain and evolve the project management methodology, tools and templates that you came up with in the development stage, and you're going to maintain and evolve the project management training that you came up with in the development stage. You're going to support HR in making sure they get you the right resources for all the projects, and you're going to support all the projects, particularly in the initiation stage, but also on an ongoing basis as needed. And again, I feel roughly the same number of people are needed, 5 to 7. And I think, again, assuming a sort of state of equilibrium and a state of maturity that you achieved and things are going pretty well, you can drop the resourcing to about 1 day per week each on average again. And again, that's going to vary. How many people you have and how much time they spend is very much going to be dependent on the types of projects you have and the maturity level of the projects that you have. So I think you can see the major benefits. If you have a successful PMO, you're going to have improved project portfolio selection to make sure it aligns with your business priorities. You're going to have much improved project reporting. I think when you see some of the dashboards I'm going to show you later on, you'll see how this can be very powerful in helping you to understand where the problems are occurring on your projects and what you can do to reduce them. You're going to get, with a good PMO, you're going to get faster and improved response to project issues and delays. You're going to have better alignment of budgets and resources to organization goals and priorities, and you're going to have increased project productivity due to improved and standard methodologies, tools and templates. And with the right metrics in place, I'll show you how you can actually measure that you're having improved and increased project success. Okay, so as I noted at the beginning, project life cycle is a critical ingredient of any project management methodology. So in this step, I'll show you how to build one for your organization, again, if you do not already have one. So again, in the PMBOK guide, they've got a good description of what a project life cycle is. Typically, it's shown as a series of 5 phases, from initiating to planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing. And as you can see from some of the arrows, it tends to be that planning follows initiation, and then you do your planning, executing, monitoring, controlling. You go around the loop a few times, and then when you're ready to close your project, you end with closing. So those are typically the phases that you'll see on most projects. So it's a series of phases that a project passes through from its initiation to its closure. In the second bullet, it says it provides the basic framework for managing the project regardless of the specific work involved. So it really doesn't matter what type of industry you're in, you're going to have this type of project life cycle. And the phases can be broken down by functional or partial objectives, intermediate results, or deliverables. So you're going to have a wide variety of ways that you show your phases. They can be geographical, they can be by time, by year. It's whatever makes sense for your projects. And they're generally time bounded with a specific starting and ending or control point. It's always a good idea to know when you're starting and stopping each phase so you can do the various checkpoints that you need to at that point in time. And I think the last bullet basically says that you can have different type, in fact you will have different types of life cycles in every organization, and in some organizations in fact you can have several life cycles. I worked for one organization that's had 7 project life cycles because they had 7 different types of projects. So your life cycles will be different and you may have several. PMI in the PMBOK have defined all the processes, all the project management processes, and so I've shown you this table, and it shows there are something like 47 processes, and you can see that each process fits in either one of the columns, and the columns are basically the phases we talked about, the initiating, planning, etc. And they also fit in one of the rows. And the rows are knowledge areas. These are the 10 knowledge areas that PMI have defined, and so every process fits into one of these 10 knowledge areas. So this is all well and good. If we were to look at this as if it looked like a life cycle, it would look something like this. You've got your 2 initiating processes, you've got about 24 planning processes, then you've got some executing processes, monitoring, controlling processes, and closing processes. So this is a life cycle, but it's what I'll call a project management life cycle because it only talks about project management processes. So you in your organization are going to have a project life cycle that's going to have deliverables that are specific to your business. Now this is going to vary so dramatically from organization to organization that I hesitate to even show you this diagram, but it's just to give you one example for one organization. In fact, this is from the Adobe Development Center, and what I find particularly neat about this is that they've defined their phases. You can see there are 5 phases at the top, from setup to analysis, design, implementation, and integration. So they've got their 5 phases, and in each of the phases they've defined a deliverable that fits into that particular phase, and that deliverable obviously is the end product of a particular process. So the process, the first deliverable might be provide or establish the architecture overview. So that might be the process, and that will be in the setup and scoping phase. So here you have all the processes for one particular organization. I also like the way they've not only defined what the deliverables are, but they've also defined who is responsible for each of those deliverables. So if, for example, on the architecture overview, it's the technical lead. So each organization is going to have something that may look like this. It will basically define the deliverables that are needed from a business perspective, from a project business perspective, to be delivered within that project. But there's also all these project management deliverables. If you remember from the previous slide, we said there were 47 processes. Well, each of these processes results in an end product. So here I've narrowed it down to 18. There are 18 project management deliverables in this bottom half of the chart here, and each of these represents a project management deliverable or a particular project management process to deliver that project management deliverable. And as you can imagine, some of them consists of many other processes, like developing the project plan will in fact consist of many other sub-components, if you like, sub-processes that are needed to produce that project plan. So your project life cycle would be an integration of the two. It would be whatever you have at the top for your particular organization as the deliverables needed for your particular types of projects, and then you would take some or all of the ones below and you would integrate those into one life cycle that would become your organization's project life cycle. So for example here, if we were to take the ones at the top, there were 21 of them, and the ones at the bottom, there were 18, we'd end up with a life cycle that would have maybe the 5 or 6 phases, and in each of those phases would be the some of the project management, some of the organization deliverables and processes, and we'd end up with 39 processes in our life cycle. So typically I find that most organizations are somewhere in that ballpark, somewhere between 30 to 40 processes, and that would be quite normal. You might have less, you might have more. I would certainly not encourage you to have too many, and at the same time you want to have enough that you've got a sort of discrete hold on what needs to be done to make your project successful. But again, the idea is not to get too complicated, because what I find most organizations tend to do is they tend to throw in more and more stuff every time they think of something, and then the process does become unwieldy and people do tend to resent implementing it. So I would say keep it as simple as you possibly can, while maintaining the integrity of the processes you need from a business perspective, as well as the processes you need from a project management perspective to get the job done. So your project life cycle, as I say, will be an integration of your own project processes, like the top half of the chart, with the selected project management processes from the bottom half. And typically around, as I say, 30 to 40 processes in total would be quite reasonable. And you're going to have many different types of projects, and you may need to have several project life cycles. But I do recommend that you start with the project life cycle that is most commonly used and develop the project life cycle methodology, training, tools and templates for the other life cycles in later phases. If you try to tackle them all at the same time, I think it'll both cause you some grief, plus it will delay the start of introducing anything, and you'll probably go round and round in circles. So pick the life cycle that's most commonly used, start with that, get the training and the methodology done for that, and at that point you can determine what other life cycles you need to document. In many cases, I think you'll find that you really don't need to do much more. You just give people the flexibility for tuning what's there and defined to apply to their different projects, because there are so many different types of projects that if you're not careful and try and meet the needs of everyone, you'll just cause more harm than good. Okay, so once you have your project life cycle defined, it is then relatively easy to build your project management methodology and training. So I've just basically got one slide for this. So the idea here is that you've got your life cycle. So let's say you have 36 or let's say 40 processes in your life cycle. Well, you're going to apply those in different phases. So let's say in the initiation phase, you've got develop the project charter, you've got whole project kickoff meetings, and you've got some other processes. So you've got all those defined in your life cycle. Well, I would create some kind of a intranet for this, something on your servers. Maybe you can use SharePoint, whatever collaboration tool you have your project management methodology accessible to all your project managers and teams, have them accessible online so that they can now go for the methodology in the first column. They can say, okay, here's an introduction to the methodology, something that tells me what it's all about, and so I can click on that link and I can get to that. And then I'm now in the initiation phase. Here's a link that tells me all about the initiation phase, and now I want to know a little bit about each of the processes. I click on those individual links and it will take me to a little write-up. I'm typically thinking let's say about a page or screen full at the most, that describes what that particular process is all about. Now some of the processes, most of the processes I think can fit on a screen, But some of the processes, particularly I'm thinking of risk management and maybe even quality management, some of those are a little bit more involved and may require multiple screens. So that's fine. So where needed, you can obviously provide as much detail as you feel is necessary. But again, my point is err on the side of simplicity and minimal content, as opposed to feeling you've got to cover every eventuality in every situation. And the more you provide, the more fog you create. So again, my recommendation in this area, having been involved with many organizations and both inside and outside, is to keep it simple. So that takes care of your methodology. Now, if you have supporting templates and tools and examples, then you can provide that in the second column. So in the second column, for example, in the project charter, we've talked about what the project charter is all about and how you do that, but maybe we'd also like to provide you a project charter template. So we provide that and you click on that and it will take you to one or more examples of project charter templates. And then maybe on the next one, we want to provide you a kickoff meeting agenda that you could use as an example. So you click on that and it will take you to one or more examples of kickoff meeting agendas. So again, I think not only just providing the methodology, but providing ready access to each of the tools and templates and examples that you might have related to that particular process and deliverable, I think is going to be very useful. So the similar thing with the project management training program, once you've defined your project management methodology, you can build a training program, and it's best done as a series of webinars. I mean, the old days of classroom instruction are pretty well gone because it's very hard to justify both the time away and the instructor time and the classroom time and all the expenses associated with that. It's so much more convenient now to just build a series of webinars. This kind of video that I'm providing can be done with anyone with a PowerPoint presentation. They can create a video and that can be then put on your server somewhere, or if you have something like WebEx or GoToMeeting or Adobe Connect Pro, any meeting, these are all webinar programs that I've used in my training. If you have something like that, you can record the session with a class. I mean, the idea of just doing a video by yourself is okay, but if you can do it with, say, 10 or 20 of your project managers attending, they can ask questions, they can make comments, you can make them part of the training. So that can be even more useful, and that's certainly what I would recommend if you do have a webinar capability or would be able to get one. So the training would follow a very similar approach. Again, assume we've got the methodology and tools and templates sorted out. Now we've just added a column that says training, and wherever there's a training module, like for introduction we might have a module, for initiation we might have a module. So whereas we had the individual processes described with a particular link, so a particular screen or screen full, several screens for a particular deliverable or process, for the training we would probably want to bundle all of the processes into the one module. So for example, for initiation we might have module 2, and for planning we might have module 3, and for executing we might have module 4, etc. Now, having said that, planning is almost as big or bigger than all the other phases put together, you know, when you're talking about it from a project management perspective. So you might have module 3, which is planning. You might have it in 3 or 4 parts, each being typically about an hour, say. So module 3, part 1, part 2, part 3, and each of those walk through all the planning processes, risk management, quality management, all the 10 knowledge areas have to be covered in that planning module. So again, it does tend to be a bit bigger, and you can either have 4 modules or break it up into 3 or 4 different parts. So that's it for training. Again, I think it's pretty self-evident. And again, I welcome any calls if any of you have any questions at all on this or any of the topics. So let's move on. We're just about halfway through. Now this is the final step, but I think this is the real fun part. So you've got your PMO, you've got the methodology, you've got the training, and now you're implementing your PMO. So let's see how you can put it to work and how we can leverage all the components of your PMO to significantly improve the success and performance of all your projects. So again, this is the same chart I said I'd be showing you from time to time. So here I've got the same chart, but you can look at each of these charts now, not from a developing a PMO perspective, but from implementing it. So once we've implemented this PMO, how are we going to address each of these components? So let's start with PMO governance. As I say, you should definitely continue the PMO role. I would like to think that the PMO director that you had in your development stage stays on for this maintenance or ongoing stage. And this person would report to senior executive and continue to provide leadership and strategic direction for your virtual PMO. And they should be senior enough and capable enough and experienced enough that they themselves can provide direct support, coaching, and mentoring for project managers as required in all the methodologies, tools, and templates. But they will also be supported by others in the PMO, and we'll talk about that in a later phase. The PMO Executive Council should have been there during the development stage to help you get up and running and set your direction, set your priorities, get approval for all the processes and the life cycles that you've established. And on an ongoing basis, they're there to continue to support all projects, and particularly in two phases. One is if it's in the portfolio management stage, which project should get done and which project should not get done. And the PMO Executive Council can play a very valuable role to help that process along. And they can also get involved when you have problems. Maybe there's a budgeting issue, maybe there's a resourcing issue, and it can't be resolved locally with your management. And this is where the Executive Council maybe has to get involved to set the priorities and provide the budget to address some of these problems. And then thirdly, I advocated a Project Manager Advisory Council. I think you can keep this ongoing. It doesn't have to be, but I think it's a good idea to keep the Advisory Council going and to use it to guide the priorities and the needs that you might have. You might find that you're tending to put certain emphasis in one area of the PMO, and the Advisory Council may say, no, we really want you to help us with this and not that. So it's always good to have some kind of external positive guidance that can help you with your direction. Portfolio management, I'm not going to belabor this, but I think you can see that there are various processes that you can follow to determine what types of projects you're going to do and which ones should take priority over others. Many organizations have a kind of spreadsheet that they'll use, and they'll put all the factors that they want to consider, and then they'll weight them and they'll come up with a weighted score, and based on that weighted score they'll say this project takes priority over this project. So again, you can consider this. I would say don't go overboard with that. In fact, stay away from it at the beginning and just use your executive council, and only introduce this when you want to provide your executive council with some kind of guidance that says, look, this is why we think this project is more important than that project. Either it's replacing an obsolete project, or there's a very strong business need. But be very careful of trying to use these tools with all the weightings and everything to come out with the answer you want, because what you find is you spend more time playing around with the weights and the scores than the real purpose, which is to try and bring out what are the factors that make this project more important than that project. So I think some process in this area is useful, but as I say, don't get carried away with it. Project management methodology and training, let's say you have it all now in place, so it's now a question of just continuing to evolve it. Maybe you find there are some gaps, maybe things change within the organization and you have to change some of the processes. Maybe you take on a different type of methodology, whether it's agile, whatever it might be, and you have to adapt or modify some of the tools, some of the methodologies. So again, it's more a maintenance thing. It shouldn't be too time consuming, and whereas you might have had 3 or 4 people involved in the development of the methodology and training, maybe all you need is one person in the background working to make sure it stays fresh and valuable. Project performance reporting is something that I think is particularly important, and I like the idea of every project having a dashboard. Now this is a fairly, let's say, sophisticated dashboard. We've got your schedule performance and your cost performance indices on the top. We've got a client satisfaction index, we've got a project resourcing index, a health check index, And if you want to drill down and look at your schedule and register and the health check data, you can do that. And at the bottom, we highlight some of the key project milestones. And on the bottom right, we highlight some of the key project issues and risks. So again, this I think is the kind of dashboard that would be useful for all projects to have. And this is an Excel spreadsheet that's available in one of the webinars that I have on project dashboards. So if anyone is interested in seeing that, how that works, they can look at that webinar. But here's one I've developed that I think can be used as a, if you want a much simpler dashboard, and particularly, many people these days I find are not just running one project, they're running multiple projects. So you just want something very simple where you can say project A, B, C. For project A, here's some data on it, and then there's a place for comments that you can just put a few words against the status of each of the projects. And on the top right, you can see the indicators: schedule, budget, client satisfaction, resourcing, risk, health check, and what the overall project indicator is. And here I'm advocating just a simple green if it's on track. A simple yellow triangle shows that it's at risk. In other words, it's, let's say, within 10% of target. And then a red if it's more than 10% at risk. So you can see some will be red, some will be green, some will be yellow. Now the advantage of having that, particularly if you can narrow everything down to be a red, green, yellow type of situation, is that you can aggregate them. And once you do that, you can now start to track not only individual projects, but you can track what the performance of your PMO is. And we'll come back to that maybe later. Okay, the next area is project initiation and support. And again, this is where once you've implemented your PMO, projects are going to need help, and wouldn't it be great if the PMO could provide it? So the 5 to 7 resources that I said you needed in development, I'm saying change the mix now. So in the in the implementation phase now, make 3 or 4 of those resources available to help all other projects. And this help, by the way, should be on a billable basis, so that time, if it's needed, is billed to the other projects. But now we've saying you've got resources that the project manager can call on to help them get out of difficult situations that they might have got into. So that help is mostly needed at the beginning, and I've talked about what that is. Make sure the project gets the skills and resources they need, that they have a budget as well as a contingency budget, that their activity estimates are realistic and attainable, that any risk areas they might have been sort of well defined and are understood and mitigated against, and that they do a health check review, and that it's green. In other words, they've committed to doing all the right things on their project. And on an ongoing basis, continue to provide consulting support during other phases as needed. And again, I think the concern might be that, hey, how can we possibly provide with a part-time resource? How can we possibly help other projects? Well, my answer to that would be twofold. One is, first of all, we're assuming that you've got a senior resource that is being made available to help other projects. And number two, very often you will find by just getting, let's say there are 5 projects and they're all having trouble, get them all together in a room for an hour, tell them, let the senior project managers helping them listen to what their problems are. I guarantee you half of the problems will all be the same. They'll either be to do with resourcing or to do with some particular process, and you can then sort those out sort of collectively as opposed to one by one. So I think just making the attempt, you will find it's not as hard as you think, and as you improve their skills, as their skills get upgraded, the need will become less and less that you actually need this kind of support. So I really say jump into it, and you'll find it will be both valuable and it will get easier over time. So project resourcing, again, very often it's the HR group that has to do that, and they tend to work. I've been a sort of CIO and a managing director, and I've actually sat in on some of the resourcing meetings. And what I find is there's lots of games that go on. So you can put in play a lot of processes that will help people make sure they get the right resources at the right time. So again, it's just one of those things. Identify that you have the problem, identify what the problems are, and once you do that, you're very quickly able to come up with some of the solutions. project health checks and audits. I've got a few slides on these. I'm going to just glance over them. If you find you want to read them, you can pause and you can read through them. But just to sum up, the project health check process is really nothing more than a checklist. And I've provided this tool. It's a project health check tool that uses Excel, and it looks at these 7 particular areas, and it's like you can see the little chart on the right. The red, the yellow, and the green represent green represents good, you're on track, yellow represents you're at risk, and red represents you have a major problem. And the blue line, it's like a spider's web, but the blue line shows where you are for each of the areas. So for example, looking at the chart for project planning, you can see the blue is in green, in the green area, so the project planning is going well. Let's say the project execution and control and the project performance are just borderline yellow and red, so you can see which areas need help. So that's basically all it is. There's a checklist like this for each of the areas, and each of the A1, B1, etc. you rate from, if you fully agree that you're doing that, then you give it a best practice, you give it a 5. If you're not quite sure, you think it needs some improvement, you give it a 3. And if you're not doing it or it's not being done well, you give it a 1. So you just basically score 1, 3, 5, and then your little chart that we showed earlier will pop up. So when you do this, you do it at the beginning, and it's done by the project manager. It's like a self-monitoring tool to make sure that they've covered all the bases. And then you do it formally in the project planning phase before you baseline your project, because as you go through the process, as you go through the checklist, you'll start to realize that maybe there are some things you either forgot about or some things you need to tackle and do differently. So it will affect your project plan. So you should definitely do it before you baseline and complete your project plan. And then at the other phases, I'm saying it's optional because I think once you've passed the planning stage, the value and the need for doing a health check becomes less, unless you get into problems. If everything goes well, then obviously there's no need. But if things start to go badly and you're off track and you're behind schedule and you've got all sorts of problems, then it doesn't hurt to go through the process again and say, hey, did you in fact cover all the bases? Did you in fact do all the processes? And did you, are you uncovering any areas that really need to be attended to? And a project audit, it's exactly the same process, but the difference here is that it's only done when a project's in trouble. So when a project is in red flagged, it's got red indicators, then either the project manager or the executive management may decree that the project should have an audit done, and it's done by the project manager, but this time with the participation and support of the PMO as well, so that the two work together to look at what's happened on the project and to see what they can do to fix it. So just to sum up, these are the ongoing PMO roles. Again, I'm showing you the picture. I think you can see that while we talk about each of the individual boxes and they all have an individual value, it's really putting all of these together that's going to make your PMO successful. So they all have to work. If you take out any of those boxes, yeah, you'll still be maybe successful, but you certainly won't be as successful because each of them provide a sort of different element of value and strength to your projects and your project teams. So if you need any help, I'm always available. Don't hesitate to call me. I've had a lot of experience and resources that can help you develop and implement your PMO faster and more successfully. So if you sign up with me for any consulting engagement, which would be typically for 1 or 2 days per week for a few months only, I can provide you with the project management tools, templates, and training materials that you can use to expedite the development and implementation of your own project management methodology and training. For example, you can see at the bottom there I've got a 3-day project management workshop with all the training materials that you can build on, so that acts as a good baseline for developing your own project management training. I've got a whole bunch of webinars, 14 webinars I'll show you on the next slide. In fact, 17 hours of training that are also available, and I've also got lots of tools and templates. In fact, here's a list of some of the tools and templates in this yellow table on the right, and I think they're all very useful, but particularly the project plan, the project dashboard, and the project health check tool that I just talked about, I think those will be particularly useful for you. So again, I'd be happy to share those with any engagement that you might want to sign up with me for. So this is my webinar program. Number 1 to 14 are the webinars, and they're all typically 1 hour, except for number 9, which is the health check workshop that uses the health check tool, and that's a 4-hour workshop. And all of these come with tools and templates related to the topic. And then finally at the bottom you can see there are 4 workshops, 2 of them PMO workshops that might be of interest to you, that typically 1 day each. And I've done this with several organizations. I think it's very important to have a quick implementation. So in as little as 10 to 12 weeks you can implement your PMO. Again, the way I'd recommend is the sort of the project management office activities that you can see at the top section there will be done typically by the PMO director that you've identified for your virtual PMO, with the help of maybe 1 or 2 other members of the team, and the methodology and training would be done by 2 to 4 members of your team working together. And the way I would recommend starting, if you don't have anything to build on yourself, is start with the 3-day workshop that I have. Use that to walk through all the different project management processes that you have. And this is of course once you've developed your life cycle. That's really the step that has to come first, but that can be done, if you don't already have one, that can be done in as little as a day, because I think most organizations intuitively know what they need to do, they just maybe have not documented in the past. So by putting together your own sort of business processes with the project management processes here, it's pretty easy to come up with the project life cycle, and then to use that life cycle to build your methodology, and then to do in parallel the training that goes with it. So again, I want to share with you that this is not really as difficult as you might think. So if you've never done it and you're really looking for help with getting your methodology and training up and getting some of the performance metrics in place so that your projects can be measured and tracked and be made to be more successful, I think I'm hoping that all this will help you. So thank you for viewing this video. I hope it was helpful to you, and I look forward to hearing from you and getting your feedback on any PMO implementations you're undertaking. So thank you again, and here's my contact information if you would like to contact me. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you again.